Good afternoon, and welcome to another Research in Action brought to you by the Division of Research at Florida Atlantic University. My name is Karen Scapinato. I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, as always, a few logistics. We value and want your questions to our presenter today, but due to the number of attendees, we don't allow verbal questions. So if you can hover your mouse in the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. If you click on that Q&A button, a pop-up comes up, and you will be able to write your question there. At the end of the presentation, we will go through as many questions as we can in our allotted time. If we do not get to your question, we will ask our presenter offline after the presentation to answer the remaining questions, and these will be posted on our website together with a recording of today's presentation. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dan Meeroff. Dr. Meeroff is professor and associate chair at Florida Atlantic University's Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geomatics Engineering. His area of specialization is environmental engineering, particularly solid and hazardous waste management, drinking water treatment, wastewater engineering, water and air quality, public health engineering, and pollution prevention. Dr. Meeroff also is the founder and director of the Laboratories for Engineered Environmental Solutions. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Meeroff.
Okay, can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see the screen. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Great. Okay, so make sure this works. Yes. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for the introduction. Again, my name is Dan Meeroff. I'm professor and associate chair in the Florida Atlantic University Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geomatics Engineering. I also grew up in South Florida. I guess many of you on the line are from South Florida. I went to JV Taravella High School in Coral Springs. If anybody's from that school, shout out, of course. And I went to Florida Tech in Melbourne. And then I went to, for my graduate degrees, I went to the University of Miami in Coral Gables, where I did my master's, Ph.D, and my postdoctoral training. And my area of specialization is environmental engineering, water, wastewater treatment systems, water quality, solid and hazardous waste management, air quality, public health, and pollution prevention. And I'm the director of the Laboratories for Engineered Environmental Solutions that we like to call LABES, where we train the next generation of environmental engineering professionals to solve some of the most interesting challenges of our time. And one of those is climate change. Our changing environment impacts a wide range of public health outcomes. And this animated slide provided by the Centers for Disease Control illustrates the most significant climate change impacts, and those would be increasing carbon dioxide levels that lead to extreme temperatures, severe weather, and rising sea levels, and also their effects on exposures and the subsequent health outcomes that can result from these changes in exposures. In this talk today, we'll take a quick look at some of those threats from the lens of energy and transportation, air pollution, water sanitation, extreme weather like hurricanes, heat waves, and wildfires, and flooding, food security, waste management, mental health, and finally public health. In this era of climate change and global pandemics, existing public health threats will continue to intensify, and new health threats will emerge. Not everyone is equally at risk. Age and access to economic resources and location are some of the factors that signify who the most vulnerable groups will be. And those typically include young children, pregnant women, the poor, the underinsured, the undernourished populations, those with pre-existing conditions or compromised immune systems, indigenous groups, and the elderly. So let's start by taking a quick look at the energy and transportation sector. Over the last 50 years, observed warming trends have been driven primarily by the burning of fossil fuels like gasoline, jet fuel, and oil and natural gas. Almost 1/3 of all energy production in the United States is used to move people and goods, and 98% of that is supplied by fossil fuels that emit carbon dioxide to the atmosphere when they're burned. Although we are becoming more efficient with energy consumption, the demand for energy is going up along with pressure on our smart grid technology, cellular networks, broadband, and even natural gas infrastructure. Just think about how many cars are in the driveway compared to the past, and how many gadgets we have that need charging. Now more than ever, we are dependent on our technology that runs on electricity, which comes from fossil fuels almost exclusively. In my family of 4, we have 6 computers, 4 laptops, 2 tablets, 2 big screen TVs, 4 cell phones, 4 Alexa thingies, my recording studio, which you can't see because I have it hidden, 2 hybrid SUVs in the garage, and so on and so forth, a partridge and a pear tree. So I want you to think about how much you rely on transportation to get around and how much that has changed during the recent lockdown. So here we have our first audience participation opportunity. I want you to think about how many miles do you think the average American travels in 1 year? And I'll give you a few seconds. Hopefully the gang in the studio can tell me when we've got a sufficient number in the poll so we can see the results. All right, so it's all over the place. I did want to tell you that in 2019, the average number of vehicle miles traveled per person per year was 13,500. Now, nobody's the average person, but the estimates right now show that this number has dropped by 38 to 48% since the lockdown started in March of 2020. Airline travel is also down. Before the pandemic, Americans loved to travel. 3 billion airline travelers per year, 30 million cruise ship passengers per year, stuffed into 6,000 person capacity mini cities that act like petri dishes for spreading disease and generating 300,000 gallons of wastewater a week. The coronavirus pandemic has increased demand for household energy consumption like air conditioners, pool pumps, hot water heaters, lights, TVs, appliances, computers, tablets, cell phones, everything else. And they're running more than ever before, but we are experiencing reduced demand in other sectors like travel and commuting. So what you can do to help is to be thoughtful about energy conservation. Support cleaner fuels, drive less. Now, driving less is a complicated issue because our departments of transportation depend on revenues from the gas tax. And if we drive less, there'll be less money to modernize our transportation infrastructure under the current funding model. But now driving less is more easy to envision than ever before because we're working remotely and avoiding travel. And this is having an enormous beneficial impact on our fuel reserves and also on air quality. Prior to the pandemic, increasing energy and transportation demand trajectories projected more than human health impacts from ground level ozone, also known as photochemical smog. This ground level ozone is different than the ozone in the stratosphere that protects us from harmful radiation from the sun. Smog is caused by chemicals in automobile exhaust reacting with sunlight. Smog creates a brown haze that lowers visibility when driving, but it's also toxic to humans and causes irritation of the respiratory system, your eyes, and diminished lung function, which has led to increased admissions to hospital and emergency department visits for asthma and increases in premature death. In addition, particulate matter from wildfires and severe pollen events and other air pollution events have increased as well. The CDC estimates that 1,000 to 4,300 additional premature deaths will occur nationally each year by 2050 from combined smog and pollutant particle health effects. But not all air pollution comes from power plants and automobile exhaust. Increasingly, we are experiencing indoor air quality problems, including the growth of indoor fungi and molds, which with subsequent increases in respiratory and asthma-related conditions. Additionally, we are indoors now more than ever before, and the stay-at-home lockdown has exacerbated the problem. Activities such as cooking and smoking and applying chemical disinfection agents or obsessively cleaning our spaces more than ever has increased. Why is this a problem, you might ask? Well, our modern buildings are designed to be more tightly sealed, to be more energy efficient, with less air exchanges with the fresh outside air, to reduce mold. But the trade-off is that the indoor air pollutants can't escape, and therefore exposures are increasingly more concentrated. Warmer seasonal air temperatures are shifting flowering times and pollen initiation from allergenic plant species. Increased carbon dioxide, which acts like a food for the plants, has elevated production of plant-based allergens. Higher pollen concentrations and longer pollen seasons can increase allergic reactions and asthma episodes and diminish productive work and school days. Simultaneous exposure to toxic air pollutants can worsen allergenic responses. So here's the chance again, the audience participation. How much air do you think you breathe every day? I chose the unit of gallons for this poll because I think everyone knows what 1 gallon looks like from a gallon of milk, for example. All right, so let's take a look. And a lot of you guessed pretty much correctly. It's around 1,500 to 3,000 gallons of air that we breathe each day. Now, try to imagine carrying that on your back. Longer, stronger pollen seasons trigger asthma attacks and allergies. Urbanization and staying indoors concentrates pollutants, and more frequent droughts spark wildfires that release dangerous particles into the air. Like we said before, young children, the elderly, people with asthma, and the immunocompromised are the most at risk. So what can you do? Download a local air quality alert app for your phone. Sign up for EnviroFlash alerts that get you daily updates on air quality at www.enviroflash.info. EnviroFlash is a free service from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and in cooperation with the Palm Beach County Health Department Air Pollution Control Program. This service will help you know when and how much to protect yourself on unhealthy air days. Fortunately for us, air pollution issues are rare in Southeast Florida due to the strong sea breeze, lack of terrain, and lack of neighboring states. But we still have industry, agriculture, urban corridors, and heavy traffic combined with intense heat that can occasionally bring unhealthy air locally. As many of you might have seen in the news, FAU researchers from my college using laser light sheet imagery documented aerosol droplets traveling more than 12 feet when a person coughs without wearing a mask. And this is the same test, but the subject is wearing a bandana. The droplets traveled less than 4 feet in this case. They repeated the test, and with a great looking fitted cotton mask like this one in the picture, the droplets traveled only 2.5 inches. So we really have demonstrated the power of facial coverings to reduce the spread of contagious airborne diseases. Another thing that we hear a lot about is the power of washing your hands for at least 20 seconds. Well, waterborne illness is a major public health issue in developing countries, and while not increasing in the United States at the moment, it remains a concern globally. Exposure to a variety of pathogens, those are microorganisms that cause disease in humans, is the reason. Rising temperatures and sea levels, extreme weather events, and seasonal variations are all known to affect disease transmission. In general, diarrheal diseases are more common when temperatures are higher or when services are disrupted. Fortunately, we learned our lessons from mistakes such as Flint, Michigan, where reducing costs was prioritized more than public health and safety. In the United States, our water treatment engineering is based on public health protection from waterborne pathogens. Luckily for us, novel viruses like coronavirus are relatively easy to inactivate using our conventional water treatment and disinfection techniques, which are designed to go after spores and cysts and hardier viruses. So we don't anticipate any spread of COVID-19 through the drinking water network or via the wastewater disposal systems back to the environment. Although recent studies detected signs of the virus going back to November 2019 in the major cities across America, this was only in the untreated wastewater and while data are limited, there's no information today that anyone has become infected with COVID-19 because of exposure to treated wastewater leaving the treatment plant. However, there is a worry that prolonged shutdowns of buildings leads to stagnant water in pipes and loss of disinfectant residual, which can trigger Legionnaire's disease, and other issues such as mold, changes in water chemistry that lead to corrosion, and release of sewer gas from dry drain traps. By 2030, we're projected to be using 56% more water than we have supplies. So water conservation is an important component of our adaptation towards resiliency. So how much water do you think you use each day? Well, I get a big old drink. Wow, a lot of you are really, really good at this. As a nation, we use anywhere from 80 to 160 gallons of water per person per day. And with more frequent hand washing, the number will probably go up. Worldwide, 4 billion people do not have or have only partial access to running water, which we take for granted every day in the United States. Oh, by the way, I've been tracking my water usage since 1995, and it's fluctuated between 60 and 80, so I feel like I'm doing my part for the water conservation. These environmentally relevant pathogens on the screen are the ones that engineers focus on during water treatment disinfection. Vibrio cholerae, on the top left, is a comma-shaped bacteria that causes cholera. Salmonella is a common coliform bacteria that causes diarrhea and tummy aches. On the lower portion, we have Entamoeba, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium, which are protozoans that form protective cysts or oocysts that make them more difficult to inactivate. And enteric viruses are found in the gut of warm-blooded animals and can cause diarrheal diseases similar to all the other ones on the list here on the screen. Engineers are trained to design systems that inactivate these common disease-causing microorganisms. Fortunately, pathogens like HIV and the novel coronavirus are relatively easier to inactivate than the ones listed here. So we rarely suspect our water and wastewater treatment systems of contributing to the spread of these kinds of microorganisms. We are expecting a 10-fold increase in water-related disease from emerging pathogens of concern, new outbreaks of novel bacteria, protozoa, and viruses, as well as toxic algae. It's estimated that 20 million Americans are currently infected annually from waterborne disease. However, we are learning a lot about the power of frequent hand washing, physical distancing, and now we're aware more than ever about how many times we touch our faces every minute. So we have a lot of the tools that we need to bring this number down. I'm sure you're tired of hearing that these are unprecedented times, but we've been through bird flu, H1N1 swine flu, HIV, SARS, Ebola, Zika in recent times, and the next ones may be just around the corner. So we must become more resilient and better prepared. Not all communicable diseases are airborne. like coronavirus, or waterborne, like some of the ones we just talked about. We also have vector-borne diseases that are transmitted via creatures like rodents, fleas, ticks, and other pests, known as vectors, including mosquitoes, like the one feeding on my finger here in the picture. The geographic and seasonal distribution of vector populations and the diseases they carry depends on land use, socioeconomics, and cultural factors, pest control measures, and access to healthcare. Climate variability can sometimes result in vector adaptation and shifts or expansions in the geographic ranges. North Americans are currently at risk from numerous vector-borne diseases, including Lyme disease, dengue fever, West Nile virus, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, hantavirus, Zika virus, and encephalitis. Vector-borne pathogens that are not currently found in the United States, like chikungunya, Chagas, and Rift Valley fever, are also threats to make the jump to the United States since vectors don't respect international borders. Infectious disease transmission is sensitive to local small-scale differences in weather, human modification of the landscape, diversity of animal hosts available, and human behavior that affects vector-human contact. Another issue is that insects like mosquitoes love CO2, and we're pumping lots more carbon dioxide into the environment. What can you do to better protect yourself against insect-borne diseases, which can occur now all year round in Florida? Drain and cover any standing water, wear appropriate clothing that leaves little skin exposed to bites, and apply approved repellents with DEET, oil of lemon, eucalyptus, paramethane diol, or IR 3535. With increasing temperatures, we predict more nutrient pollution that triggers harmful algae blooms like the one seen here in the picture. We expect these events to occur more often in more places and with more intensity than in the past. Harmful algae blooms typically occur when water temperatures are warmer than usual, which is now almost year-round for us in Florida. Warmer water due to climate change favors harmful algae growth in a number of ways. Toxic blue-green algae prefer warmer water. Warmer temperatures prevent water from mixing, allowing algae to grow thicker and faster. Algal blooms absorb sunlight, making water even warmer and promoting more blooming. Climate change leads to more frequent droughts, which makes freshwater saltier. This can cause marine algae to invade freshwater ecosystems and estuaries. Algae need carbon dioxide to survive. It's their food. Higher levels of carbon dioxide in the air and water can lead to more rapid growth of algae, especially the toxic blue-green kind. Climate change affects rainfall patterns, leading to alternating periods of drought and intense storms, which we'll talk about in a minute. This can cause more nutrients to run off into the water bodies, feeding more intense algae blooms. Sea level rise of up to 1 meter, which is a little more than 3 feet, by the year 2100 would create more shallow and stable coastal waters off the coast of Florida, with less mixing and higher concentrations of nutrients from coastal upwelling. These conditions are perfect for the growth of algae. If you are an avid boater or fisherman or just enjoy being in the outdoors, toxic algae blooms can be harmful to your health and your pets, and can also cause fish kills. What you can do is join a citizens monitoring network to report algae in the waterways. I suggest you contact the Florida Department of Health for more information. And do some simple things around the house to limit your nutrient runoff. Check the label and buy detergents with no phosphorus. As you can see on the screen, I have several different versions of the labeling on detergents, but then sometimes they don't say this one contains phosphorus, so you have to check the fine print as you see in the lower left corner. Properly dispose of your pet waste. Maintain your septic systems properly. Conserve water. Don't over-fertilize. Choose native plant species in your gardens. And take precautions when washing your car, like using phosphorus-free soap. You know the old saying that when you wash your car, it's sure to rain? Well, we expect more frequent and more severe storms and flooding as a consequence of our changing climate. Back in 2017, which was not that long ago, there was an unprecedented 3 major hurricanes in our neighborhood at the same time. Hurricanes Irma, Jose, and Katia. And also Tropical Storm Lee and Hurricane Maria, which some of you might have heard of, by the way, are just off the screen to the right if you're counting at home. Of course, we all remember Irma. It was headed straight to my house in Boca Raton, so my wife and I evacuated to a shelter with our 6-month-old boy. And that experience taught us a lot about how to deal with isolation and major disruption in services. Some of those lessons have helped serve my family well during the pandemic lockdown. Extreme heat events and heat waves have caused deaths from heat stroke and other related conditions. Heat waves are also associated with increased hospitalizations for cardiovascular, kidney, and respiratory disorders. Extreme summer heat is increasing in the US. Obviously, we're going through a massive heat wave all over the United States right now. And climate projections indicate that extreme heat events will be more frequent and more intense in the coming decades. Some heat-related death risks have diminished due to better forecasting, heat health early warning systems, and increased access to air conditioning for the US population as a whole. Urban heat islands combined with aging population, urbanization, and other things like that are projected to make urban populations more vulnerable to heat health related impacts in the future. Extreme heat related deaths and illnesses are preventable. Despite this fact, more than 600 people each year in the United States are killed by extreme heat. Stay cool, stay hydrated, and stay informed is the mantra. Know the signs of dehydration, heat stroke, and heat exhaustion. Wear appropriate loose-fitting, light-colored, lightweight clothing with a wide-brim hat and sunglasses. Schedule your outdoor activities for early morning or evening hours if possible. Pace yourself. Wear sunscreen SPF 15 or higher, broad spectrum or UVA, UVB protection, and apply it 30 minutes before exposure. Never leave children or pets in your parked cars. Drink plenty of fluids. Sugary or alcoholic drinks are not considered fluids for this purpose, by the way. And replace lost salt and minerals with sport drinks. FloridaTracking.com has information that can be handy for you. You can download the OSHA NIOSH Heat Safety Tool app on your cell phone. It has a heat index indicator and a button for precautions and what to do if you're experiencing symptoms of heat exhaustion or worse. Climate change is also increasing the vulnerability and frequency of wildfires in certain regions of the United States. Long periods of record high temperatures and droughts contribute to dry conditions that can exacerbate wildfires. Smoke contains particulate matter, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and various volatile organic compounds, which are smog precursors, and can significantly reduce air quality, both locally and in areas downwind of the fire. Smoke exposure increases respiratory and cardiovascular hospitalizations, emergency department visits, medication purchases for asthma, bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and respiratory infections. It's also been associated with hundreds of thousands of deaths annually across the globe based on an assessment of global health risks from landscape fire smoke. Increases in extreme precipitation and total precipitation have contributed to severe flooding events in certain regions. Floods are the second deadliest of all weather-related hazards in the United States, accounting for approximately 98 deaths per year due to drowning, typically. In addition to the immediate health hazards associated with extreme precipitation events when flooding occurs, other hazards can appear once the storm passes. Elevated waterborne disease outbreaks have been reported in the weeks following heavy rain when floodwaters mix with underground sewer collection systems. Water intrusion into buildings can result in mold contamination that manifests later, leading to indoor air quality problems. Buildings damaged during hurricanes are especially susceptible to water intrusion. Populations living in damp indoor environments experience increased prevalence of asthma and other upper respiratory tract symptoms like coughing and wheezing, as well as lower respiratory tract infections like pneumonia, RSV, and other things like that, all of which put you at greater risk for coronavirus. Flooding is responsible for about $8 billion in damages each year to households and infrastructure in the US. Beyond the immediate danger of drowning during floods, there's also hazards during disaster preparation and post-event cleanup, like physical injuries, exposure to mold and other toxic chemicals, and the mental trauma of losing all of your possessions and being displaced from your home. What can you do to prevent flood risk? Contact your local floodplain manager and find out about what they are doing at the community level to reduce your flood risk and your insurance premiums through the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System. Find out about rainwater harvesting, community rain gardens, reducing impervious, and other things like that. Globally, climate change is expected to threaten our food production, food quality, prices, and distribution systems. Many crop yields are predicted to decline because of the combined effects of changes in rainfall, severe weather events, and increasing competition from weeds and pests on crop plants. Livestock and fish production are also projected to decline. Prices will rise in response to declining food production and increases in petroleum prices used to make pesticides and fertilizers. Americans with particular dietary patterns will experience shortages of key food staples. Food insecurity increases with rising food prices. People cope by turning to nutrient-poor but calorie-rich foods, with consequences ranging from malnutrition to obesity. The nutritional value of some foods is projected to decline. Elevated atmospheric CO2 is associated with decreased plant nitrogen concentration, and therefore decreased protein, with reduced levels of key nutrients like calcium, iron, zinc, vitamins, and sugars. Farmers are expected to need to use more herbicides and pesticides because of the increased growth of pests and weeds, as well as decreased effectiveness and duration of some of our chemical pesticides we have in our arsenal now. Recently, the agriculture industry has been hit hard in many ways. The trade war, tariffs with China, the water shortages, labor shortages from immigration fights and border lockdowns, market shutdowns and supply chain breakdowns. The consequences will be long-lasting, with small farms likely going out of business and consolidating the agriculture industry into few monopolies. Buying local and growing our own food will become more important in creating resiliency to these kinds of adverse events. We all have stories from the lockdown. Some of us learned how to cook for the first time. Some of us coped with overconsumption of junk food. Some of our favorite items became less available, and we learned to make substitutions. I don't know about you, but I still haven't found a single box of toilet paper at my Publix. So it's taking longer than we thought. And the number of home gardens increased considerably, although all of the vegetable herbs I planted at the beginning of the lockdown managed to die, as you can see in the picture. Another bright side is that there is no evidence that transmission of COVID-19 is associated with food, food handling, or packaging. So how many pounds of food do you think Americans throw away each year? All right, I'm sure glad I didn't ask my original question, which was how many pounds do you think you gained or lost during the lockdown? But okay, so the most popular choice was around 200 pounds. Well, the answer is around 200 to 300 pounds per person per year. That's enough food to feed a family of 4 for 2 to 3 months. In Palm Beach County, we throw away enough waste to fill a football stadium 20 feet high every single day. US consumers each year toss enough aluminum cans to rebuild the entire commercial airline fleet 4 times over. Enough disposable plates and cups to serve a meal to everyone on Earth 6 times. Enough diapers to go to the moon and back 7 times. Admittedly, I'm contributing to that one with my 1 and 3-year-olds still struggling with potty training. 52 pieces of junk mail. Oh, sorry, that number is 52 billion pieces of junk mail. I feel like I get more than my fair share on that one. And 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour. We can definitely do better than this. At least 8 million tons of plastic end up in our oceans every year. If your home office looks like this, maybe we should start recycling. So let's talk about recycling. Do you recycle at home? That's not a poll question. I hope you are. Do you know what happens to your recyclables after you take them to the curb once a week? Actually, the recycling truck I can hear is right at my house picking up right now. Depending on where you live, you might have single stream where all your recyclables are in one container, or dual stream like we have here in Palm Beach County with a blue bin for containers and a yellow bin for fiber. Typically, the waste hauler takes your recyclables from the curb to a material recovery facility. That's what we call a MRF, that manages the sorting and processing of the recyclables. At the MRF, the recyclables get dumped onto a tipping floor, and then conveyor belts carry them to sorting machines, or sometimes they get sorted by hand. Then the sorted material gets baled, and the bales get sold, or in the worst case scenario, if the material cannot be sold or stored, they end up back in the landfill or in the waste to energy facility. What can you do to make sure you do your part on recycling? Don't try to recycle anything with a plug. Donate or return to the store if possible. Don't put clothes, shoes, textiles, and stuff like that in the recycling. Also donate those items. Don't recycle if you see a label that says compostable or biodegradable. Those materials are intended for the compost heap and they don't recycle well. Don't recycle plastic foil, wrappers, and chip bags. And don't expect someone to fix your recycling mistakes after the can leaves the curb. Finally, don't recycle anything you can tie into knots, like plastic bags, air pillows from your Amazon box, your produce bags, your plastic film and packaging, or the plastic wrap around a case of water bottles like these. Probably asking why. Here's why you should never put those things into the recycling. The stuff gets caught up in the mechanism of the sorting machines, and then they have to shut down the whole process, and somebody has to physically remove those before they can get started again. So don't bag your recyclables, keep them loose in the bin. If you collect them in bags at home, simply dump the recyclables out in your bin and reuse the bags. And now, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we are also generating large amounts of PPE, or personal protective equipment like masks and disposable gloves. Of course, this stuff is not supposed to be disposed of in the recycling. But here we are on the MRF tipping floor, so the public did not get the memo on this one. I see diapers, soiled paper towels, plastic wraps, face masks, and gloves all over the place. This stuff is supposed to go into the garbage, not the recycling. Anything that's not recyclable that ends up in the recycling bins is considered contamination. China and other major buyers of recyclables typically only accept bales with less than 0.5% contamination. Typically in the US, the level of contamination in recycling bins, that would be the stuff that doesn't belong in the recycling, is around 25% for single stream and around 10% or less for dual stream. So our inability to make smart recycling choices at our home during our sorting process has serious consequences at the MRF. If the bales can't be sold, they'll get burned or buried, which defeats the whole purpose of recycling in the first place. The rule of thumb is, when in doubt, throw it out in the garbage. Don't flush down the sink, don't wish cycle it. Now realize in Palm Beach and Broward counties, we have large industrial scale incinerators known as waste to energy plants. And some of these facilities operate as mass burn units in which the garbage is converted to CO2, water, vapor, and electricity. But other components of the waste stream are not converted, like mercury from food waste containing fish, lead from batteries, and dioxins from burning plastics. Now, one thing we must not throw out with the garbage is our most precious possession, our minds. Mental illness is one of the major causes of suffering in the United States. Following disasters, mental health problems increase, both among people with no history of mental illness and those at risk, a phenomenon known as common reactions to abnormal events. These reactions may be short-lived or in some cases long-lasting. For example, we observed high levels of anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder among people affected by Hurricane Katrina and other recent natural disasters, including floods, wildfires, and heat waves. I'm sure some of you can relate to this during Hurricane Irma or the more recent pandemic lockdown. Health consequences of intensely stressful exposures include preterm birth, low birth weight, maternal complications, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. Patients suffering from mental illness are at risk during hot weather because their medications may interfere with their ability to regulate their self-temperature and even directly cause hyperthermia. Additional potential mental health impacts, although less well understood, include possible distress associated with displacement and anxiety and despair. First responders who witness tragedy at great scale for prolonged periods and people who are displaced from their normal routines are the most vulnerable. We've all experienced the stress of the lockdown, and some of us have found positive ways to cope by being connected with our online communities, exercising more, bicycling and running, gardening, some more effective than others, admittedly, and other beneficial hobbies, but some of us have found a darker way to deal with the anxiety. I took a stroll with my two little boys in the neighborhood on recycling day during the height of the most recent pandemic lockdown back in May, and I found every blue bin was full of dark coping mechanisms like this one. We all remember how it used to be and have now become keenly aware of the public health implications for behaving the way we used to. As we slowly begin to reemerge from the lockdown and try to reopen the economy, the way we interact with each other in public spaces has changed, and it may be forever. There may not be any way that we can return to the way it was, even if we do have a vaccine. Today, in this talk, we've explored how our changing climate has already or will have profound effects on many aspects of our lives, including our health. For the most part, many members of our society have adapted to the requirements placed upon us and the level of seriousness with which our institutions have tried to deal with the situation to flatten the curve. However, what gives pause, other than the recent resurgence and Florida becoming a second epicenter, is that the amount of resources mobilized to combat the pandemic show that when the government has the will to tackle a challenge, the money becomes magically available. But the unintended consequences of our battle against coronavirus means that less money will be available for much needed climate change resiliency projects. During the lockdown, many people lost their jobs, and many of those even permanently lost their jobs. We're headed for a global recession, or perhaps even a depression, depending on how long this lasts. The equation is less money, less jobs equals less people obeying the guidance, more poverty, more stress, more mental health issues. We'll need to bind together and help our neighbors in our community to get through this so that we can eventually get back to the business of dealing with the main challenge of our time, which is climate change. But now we know we can do it. So let's all do our part, 6 feet apart, that is. And as we enter into this uncertain future, let's emerge on the other side with a new normal that reflects our need as a species to protect people, the planet, and prosperity by providing all of us with a proper sense of purpose that includes finding solutions to the great environmental challenges of our time. This is my business card. It has my email address so you can get in touch with me. It was a pleasure today being your guide on our shared journey about how we can work together to make a better world for our children than the one we inherited from our parents. At this time, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dan. That was very interesting, and you covered a lot of different material. And the questions that I've seen also cover a very different, large variety of different areas. Just to remind everybody, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A button in the bottom of your screen and type your question. We will try and go through as many questions as we can in the remaining time. If we do not get to your question, please don't worry, we will collect them and have Dan answer them offline and post on our website. With that, I'm going to start. Dan, might you address the recent media around certain hand sanitizers having carcinogens like methanol in them?
I think I'll have to go do a little digging to find out what the particular carcinogens are that they're talking about. I don't believe that methanol is a carcinogen in and of itself, so it's probably something used to generate or to generate the methane during the manufacturing process. So there are multiple ways to make methanol. So I'll probably have to get back on that one.
Okay. You mentioned early on that you are tracking your own water usage in your house. There's a question on how are you doing that if anybody else would like to do that?
Oh yeah, so that's fairly easy if you have your own home. When you own your own home, you typically have a water meter that's yours only. And every once in a while, you know, the guy who comes over to spray wash my neighbor's house hooks up to my water hose, so it's not always my water. But in the water bill, they'll give you an estimate of how much water you use in like thousands of gallons. And so I've been tracking that number monthly. Of course, I take that number, divide by the number of people in the house, and I get the number of gallons per person per day that we use per month.
Then you can put that in some kind of spreadsheet, right? And,
yeah.
And,
I have a single spreadsheet which has that one with my energy conservation data and some other stuff too.
Great. Thank you. You showed that very interesting close-up picture of that mosquito biting your finger or somebody's finger. Do you know how that was taken? Did you actually take that?
No, I didn't take the picture. I can't even take a selfie, probably.
There were some questions how you take a close-up of a mosquito biting your finger.
Yes, I don't know, but some of my students have some really great cameras. I'll have to ask them what they use. But I'm pretty sure it's a cell phone camera.
Getting back to some more serious questions, you mentioned that I had one of the recommendations to dispose of pet waste appropriately. Many of us, I'm sure, are picking up the pet waste, but then putting it in our normal garbage, which then ends up in some landfill, which cannot be really the best way to dispose of pet waste, because that just concentrates the issue in the landfill, right? Do you have any suggestions on how to better dispose of pet waste?
Yeah, I mean, that unless you potty train your pets, that is the recommended way right now, is to put it into the garbage. Now, so when I said properly dispose of, that I meant I see all the time, everyone in my neighborhood except my family has a pet, and there's, you know, poop piles all over the neighborhood. When it rains, that poop goes down into the storm sewers and eventually gets discharged into the environment, and all the nutrients in that material, and the nitrogen and phosphorus, are food for the algae. So it's a bigger problem if we just leave it in the environment rather than putting it in the bag and disposing it as if it was a diaper.
Right. So if we're putting it in the garbage, though, and it goes to landfill, that kind of leaves a concentrated problem then, right? I mean, it rains on the landfill as well, and you still have the same issue that could go into stormwater and you know, and groundwater.
Yeah, the chances at the landfill, most of our facilities are double lined, so the chances that once it gets buried that it becomes an issue later on is low. And then for us in Palm Beach County, most of our waste is incinerated at the mass burn waste energy facility. So it does get turned into electricity. So there is a beneficial use there.
Okay, great. Our next question is related to weed killers. Are there any natural products that can be used to kill weeds that, for example, come through concrete sidewalks or patios or something like that?
There are, but they don't work as well as these nasty chemicals that last forever. So that's always the trade-off. I probably can't give you names of specific ones to use. I'm always looking too. Whenever I go to the hardware store, I would ask the person, you know, what do you think? And you know, they'd always come back to saying Roundup works the best. I'm not going to say that Roundup is good. Obviously, they're in a huge battle in the courts over the chemicals that they have been using. So this is a tough one to give a definitive answer. But there are natural products that are in the market, but they don't work as well as the evil, vile stuff that we've been using in the past.
Yeah.
There's always a trade-off. I think that's something
Right.
you'll learn from this talk.
That's why it's evil, right? That's why it's bad for the environment. Is there any evidence that a plant-based diet helps the environment? If you're a vegetarian?
Well, again, you know, it's a trade-off. There's a lot, I mean, I'm from Argentina, so we love to eat steak. And in the process of beef, right, there's some issues related to climate change that we need to deal with. And if my phone turns on every day saying that, you know, methane from cattle production is exacerbating the climate issues, and yes, it is. Plant-based diets, if they're done correctly, will meet all the nutritional needs that you have. Some of us have some very difficult food allergies and other things like that where we need specialized diets. So completely going away or telling someone that they can't eat meat or they should be vegetarian or vegan or something of that nature is complicated because of the dietary restrictions of all people.
Yes, it's everybody's decision, of course. Coming back to recycling, there have been actually quite a bit of discussions on what happens to our material that we are putting into our recycling bins and are being picked up by waste management. What happens to that recycled mass after it leaves our house?
Well, at the Palm Beach County Solid Waste Authority, for example, they have a whole department that works on trying to get buyers for the material. So they process the material, make it as clean as they can with the least amount of contamination, so it's worth the most that it can get. But the buyers change. You know, 2 years ago, I would say almost everything went to China, and now almost nothing goes to China. And that was another issue. We had to put all of our recyclables onto boats and haul them across the world, which is a greenhouse gas footprint we didn't want to have. So today, the infrastructure for turning recyclable materials into new products in the US is growing market, but it's very small compared to what China had in the past. So there was a big disruption in the recycling industry several years ago, and then this pandemic has exacerbated that issue. A lot of times the bales that used to be getting hundreds of dollars per bale, per ton, right? A lot of times they're now either $0 or you're paying someone to take it from you if you're a solid waste manager. So is recycling healthy right now? No, it was always a money loser, but it was trying to minimize the loss of money. That's not why we do recycling. We do it because we need to save the landfill space and the natural resources. So if you are, you know, a hyper vigilant recycler like myself, or you are the opposite like my wife, there's somewhere in between that we have to meet. And then once the recycling markets, you know, stabilize again, it should be a much better economic option.
You must have interesting conversations at home.
Yes, especially about the temperature.
Oh, we have those as well. How does the prevalence of bulk packaging affect food waste?
Not sure I understand the question. You know, I do all the shopping for myself, so in the family, and so I'm keenly aware of how much food we throw away. And a lot of times, you know, I just need a pound of ground beef, right? Not 6, right? And if I freeze it, it's going to go bad, so I end up throwing it all out. So I totally understand that. You know, I try to have a relationship with the guy behind the counter and say, you know what, can you just weigh me quick pound here, but it does take extra time, and we're always very busy. So again, it's a trade-off. It depends on how much it hurts when you see the dollars being thrown away into the garbage can.
Right, right.
Instead of being eaten.
Right, and if you have been to one of our previous presentations by Dr. Hallstrom, he actually had a project where he had sensors on waste bins to monitor how much food waste actually was accumulated in a cafeteria. So it's astounding. Coming back to climate change, you mentioned climate change in your talk. Do you have a sense for how much the temperature has changed in Florida over the past 10 years?
Well, having grown up in Florida, the thing I've noticed the most is the changing patterns of the rainy parts of the day, typically in the rainy season, like when that's happening, when it tends to occur, and how often. Temperature is the tough one because, like, it seems to me that all year round, I mean, I don't even own a jacket. I mean, it seems to me all year round it's the same temperature. My wife also, she's from New York. She complains about how there's no seasons, but you know, I don't think we feel so much the changing temperature because we don't have so much temperature variation over the year if we are native Floridians. Mm-hmm. And but you know, during the last few weeks, we've hit record highs from Miami-Dade County to Palm Beach County, like back to back to back to back. And the temperature doesn't really matter as much as how much it feels like. So there, if you read the temperature feels like 120, but the temperature outside is only 96, that's because, you know, we're near, at or near 100% humidity all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to end with one additional question. If we haven't asked your question yet, we will get to them offline and post on our website. We had several questions about the recording of this presentation. It will go up on our website, which is the Division of Research's website on Research in Action. If you just Google FAU Research in Action, you should be able to find it. It should go up in the next few days. Okay, our last question then is, how do we check the health of our water? You mentioned all these parasites and bacteria that can be in the water. How do we check for parasites and germs that can cause waterborne diseases?
Well, that's a good question. There's many ways to answer that. Let me start by saying there's a document that is sent out to all the customers each year, which is a water quality report. And so it documents anytime there was a violation and what to do about it. Sometimes they will make a phone call. The utility will make a phone call to the customers, or a robocall. And if you have your phone set to not hear it, you'll miss it. But you know, if you are watching the utility website, they will post information whenever they have this issue occur. Having said that, it's extremely rare. I used to actually, I would say, how many years is that? Oh my gosh, more than 20 years ago, I wrote these documents for utilities when I was a student. So they still use the same format that I developed back then. So what is basically a table saying how many times they violate. Again, it's there's no watchdog for utilities. They self-report, and it's rare that there's an issue of honesty between the utility and the customer, but it does happen, unfortunately. How else you can monitor at the home? There's no like test kits for anything like that. But one thing I would say that is tends to be an issue if you have a big house, like we have in our house, we have three bathrooms, so the third bathroom gets rarely used. And it's a possibility that Legionella can grow in the pipes if you don't turn the water on every once in a while. So, you know, during the lockdown, we don't have someone coming to clean the houses often. So I'm running around, you know, cleaning everywhere. And I'm just, you know, when I do that, I just run the water a little bit. I know it's opposite of water conservation thought process in your mind, but I'd rather not die because I didn't turn on the water faucet. Right. So there's a few things that you can do at the home, but in general, it's rare that there's an issue. If you have an older home and you have pipes with that have lead in them, I would definitely contact my utility and see what they can do to help you to maybe convert to some more modern plumbing system, so you don't have that issue, especially if you have kids.
Great. Thank you, Dan. We're out of time. Again, we will be posting the recording and the remaining answers to your questions online at FAU's Division of Research in Action website. With that, thank you very much, Dan. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.